Hello. Noom, calm, Duolingo. Change our behaviors through fun, even though they're on tough subjects. I joined several popular daily accountability apps during COVID where behaviors change, I could hold myself accountable, and now here we are. The future of diversity, equity, and inclusion is in your pocket. I'm Jess Pettit of Good Enough Now, and I'd like to invite you on an adventure called Facets.life. It's complicated, and what I mean by that is across 20 years, I have helped tons of organizations with my speaking and consulting to create workspaces that value and include people. And that shouldn't be that complicated, but we all know it's super expensive to correct, reconcile, learn from, and it's way too late to prevent real harm being done in the workplaces. So, more complications. This is a great study from Deloitte. 61% of employees cover or hide something about themselves. It's even higher when we actually look at LGBT folks, 83%, black employees, 79, women of color, 67, 66% across for all women. But what makes this complicated, or shall I say multifaceted, see what I did there, is that 55% of employed people in the United States are terrified of doing diversity and inclusion work because they fear they're going to do something wrong. These are two competing facets that make DEI complicated because we know we need it and we're scared of doing it. Insert facets.life. Now, as a DEI consultant or possibly employee resource group chairs, chief diversity officers, I believe we're looking at the telescope the wrong way when we're looking for this particular solution. This is where facets.life comes in. The problem itself does actually impact recruitment, retention, recognition, stakeholders, customer loyalty, our greater neighborhoods. But a multifaceted solution like Facets.life can do this. And this is where my learnings from Catapult really come in. Facets.life does three things. Number one, it aggregates behavioral data of users that can inform best practices and DEI strategies based on demographics, geography, and industry. Basically, instead of hiring expensive consultants that guess. Number two is Facets.life provides a structured program for those kind of siloed people who are responsible for doing the DEI work inside the organization. And number three, in place of lawsuits or expensive consultants, users can actually entertain themselves and learn anonymously and confidentially, support each other, and take responsibility for their own learning. So, how does the app work? Great question. First, it can provide ongoing learning environment for immediate use. No individualized data is needed to be collected. Daily work, similar to those other apps I talked about, there's individual and group coaching and accountability. It's a choose your own adventure with micro learnings and in-depth search functions. There's also quantifiable measurement. We're going to use the IDI as an outside source so we don't have to gather confidential information or demographic identifiable information. And there's a support group for small teams and corporate people to be able to acknowledge one another and their own learnings and use qualified administrators to monitor how they're doing. The ability to communicate internally without actually knowing who you're communicating with can also help kind of guide the curriculum as well. Now, this ongoing learning community environment can generate reports that can be personal and professional development plans. It also provides structure for a DEI rollout of a strategic plan, and those correlated behaviors then inform next steps, even though it's completely anonymous. Now, when we start talking about milestones and progress, I think the biggest thing that I've really taken from my Catapult learnings is the competitive advantage here. And because it's completely anonymous and confidential, the data labeling is the most important piece. The accountability of that ongoing learning keeps people engaged. So if we're talking about a subscription model, that's a growth opportunity. The other piece of the growth opportunity is revolutionary style, is that we could become the Pew and Gallup research source to inform DEI best practices across the board. That's kind of a larger revolutionary thinking, and it's bigger than just my clients. Now, the marketing opportunity here, when we start talking about that research, we can make money from the subscription model, but we can make even more money by being that go-to resource. Now, I mentioned a little bit some of the learnings from Catapult, but I really want to highlight that it was innovative mindset, agile, and design thinking that was kind of the perfect storm for this complicated solution for a complicated problem. It made it super easy. And why us? Even easier. The multifaceted answer was right under my nose. Tony and Camille and I together have half a century of DEI experience and can immediately roll out a beta test for government, medical, education, corporate, and association spaces so we can get to at least 200,000 users where we then can generalize that data. Now, I'm going to run out of time, so I encourage you to ask me specific questions about the front end or back end, scaling, Facets 2.0, which is really where that research takes place, and what the next steps will be. But in the meantime, I really encourage you to think about what would happen if personalized, anonymous, and confidential DEI learnings could be as accessible as in your pocket. I believe they can, and I believe the multifaceted solution here is Facets.life. So, hit me with your questions. How can I help you?
Just a few slides ago, it said you have a demo.
Yeah, so the app pictures that I showed you, you can also go to Facets.life to look at the wireframes. If that's helpful. I assume that you're probably not multitasking. Just guessing.
Oh.
We're not multitasking. Yeah, no. This is a fantastic presentation. I so relate with your problem statement. And the fact that a lot of people just are scared to take the leap to talk about things that have so far been uncomfortable to talk about at work. And so I guess my question to you is, are there beacons out there besides, like, I love your beacons for adjacent industries. Are there beacons already in this industry that would say that the same behavioral coaching that you're providing here actually shows benefits for the DEI space?
Great question. I think what's fascinating is this, how fear shows up is that individually, even the experts have to cover bits and pieces of them in order to feel like they can show up and belong, I'm using air quotes, into that workspace, even if they're an outside consultant. Inside of this covering is also some lived experience that leads to expertise. Mm-hmm. The flip of it is that most people are terrified to start doing this work outside of that lived experience. So they can feel very informed and very dumb at the same time. So what I think the strongest point of this particular curriculum is that there is no existing research hub for aggregated actual behavioral data that can then be separated out based on demographic, geography, or industry. So for example, I work with a lot of white men, largely because a lot of white men are in the C-suite. But instead of figuring out what Todd is doing, we can figure out what white men in North Carolina in banking are doing as they're progressing through the curriculum, which keeps it anonymous and confidential, reduces that fear. But then the ability to really generalize that behavioral data will revolutionize how strategic planning is rolled out for the concept of increasing belonging. Does that help? But nothing like this exists.
Yeah. No, yeah, the theory behind it is good. It's good to know that nothing like this exists. I'm not surprised that nothing exists. I'm a little disappointed, but it means there's a good opportunity there. So I'll leave it to my other colleagues here to ask questions as well.
So the people in the boat, were those is that your team, or were those just colleagues that you were just hanging out having a good time?
I thought this would be a totally appropriate time to tokenize a Black man and woman. No, those are my friends. That was supposed to be a joke. I hear no laughter.
Well, you're not listening well then. You're not listening well. We're laughing over here and smiling.
We're definitely laughing.
Right, okay, great. Yeah, so Camille and Tony are, they have been
question.
I'm sorry, we're talking at the same time.
Okay, here's the second question.
Yeah.
Is how are you going to get people to adopt the program, actually use it, and be honest in utilizing it?
Right. So excellent question. And literally on that boat trip, Camille and Tony and I were talking about our current existing client base, right? So it's always a little tricky when you sign NDAs with different clients. There's different industries, etc. I do more education, corporate, and association. They do much more medical and government. And what we were on this boat ride, and we're realizing that one, this problem exists. Two, Noom, Calm, Duolingo, we all had different experiences, and we're like, what if there's an answer there? And then when I started talking about the innovative mindset, at that point that was the only class Catapult had offered. This kind of epiphany occurred. So then we asked the same question: how do we get people to keep using it? And the reality is that you don't need that many people to regularly use it to actually be able to quantify that generalizable behavior. So if we take Noom, which I did a deep dive on Noom, it might have 400 million users, but only 40 million regularly engage with the app for at least a month. So inside that month, we can aggregate that behavior where most people, if we go to the IDI, I'm probably answering too long, but the IDI is the outside assessment tool, and 66% of the people who take that outside assessment show up in the middle stage, which is called minimization. So there's a functional assumption that most people are going to kind of show up there if they engage with the app to begin with. But to actually be able to inform the people who are using the app and where they are doing well and where their own learnings might recede a little, I think is a game changer. Gamifying the involvement, whether it's from unicorn points or like being able to customize the curriculum experience to things that make people a little bit more comfortable, then that can keep them engaged, and then we can counter that comfort with maybe some more learning curves. So the learning process itself can even be as customized down to, now I'm getting really fancy, but let's say in your zip code, your personal or professional development plan could say, why don't you go to this, parade that's happening this weekend in your neighborhood? They may not even know about it because it's outside of their realm of influence. But we could get that specific to encourage people to get comfortable with being uncomfortable. And that comfort of being discomfort maybe will keep them engaged. I think it will.
Okay, thank you.
No worries. Also, I'm terrified of boats, which is literally about getting comfortable with being uncomfortable.
I hear you. I hate boats too. So
Hard pass.
hard pass.
Dolphins, that's why there's cameras. No.
Jennifer, do you have something you want to ask?
No, I'm like thinking really hard.
Oh, I'm sorry, because I'm like in the middle. You're gonna have so many more thinkings to do.
No, this is, I mean,
No.
it's just, this was a fascinating one. I'm trying I'll tell you the question I'm like dealing with in my head, which you just answered, but I'm still reckoning with, is the, all of these motivation apps, let's call them that, require some degree of participation. You're saying, hey, I don't care how many people drop off. I care about just, the number of people that go through a particular period of time, because I can quantify back to the organizations, like how much better along on their journey they are. But still, to me, still doesn't solve for the fact of like, oh, I'm uncomfortable by all this, and like going to a pride parade isn't going to change that. Like there is the like self-engagement that needs to happen with Facets.life. That's what I'm trying to unpack in my head.
No, that makes total sense. And if I'm going to move to my appendix, look at me cheating. If we go to the kind of 2.0 phase, that might help a little bit kind of put this into your space. So I think that, Jennifer, what you just said makes a lot of sense for kind of the beginning use of the data. How do we measure people's incremental improvement? But to be completely frank, that's what we've been doing for the last 30 years, or at least the last 20 years of my career, is trying to fix one person at a time, and we're still here. Where I think the real power, the 2.0 version, is where do they stop using the app? That's just as helpful. And then are there techniques that we can use to kind of remind them to come back? So Noom, Calm, Duolingo, they all have those too. Like, hey, we haven't seen you in a while. Come on back. And then they give you little pellets. You start playing the game again. But where they stop is a real connection that I personally am very excited about finding. What is the intersection of someone's lived experience, where they live, where they work, and who they identify as demographically? Where do they stop at a discomfort level? To be able to quantify the discomfort versus really trying, I think what I've been doing for 20 years is trying to quantify a learning process. But you're totally correct. One pride parade changes one person's life and has absolutely no impact on someone else. But the discomfort edge is where, one, the real moneymaker can happen. And frankly, I'm working towards my unemployment. I hope someday I don't have this job anymore. And I believe being able to quantify the intersection of the correlation or aggregated data of where people fall off and what brings them back, that's the game changer, because that's what's going to inform real-time DEI strategic planning rollout in organizations. That's what's going to shift the world. I know I sound like a revolutionary hippie, but like that's probably my biggest takeaway from Catapult. I'm one person. I don't have employees. My dogs don't have thumbs. And I came up with this idea that I actually think is completely unstoppable and is going to cure the biggest problem in my own industry so that I no longer have a job.
Thank you, Jess. That was great.
No worries.
Awesome. Thank you, Jess.
You're welcome. Thank you for
Wonderful.
looking at facets.life. See you soon.